So Randall Munroe is the creator of a popular webcomic called XKCD. Some of you may be familiar with it. And he also wrote a book. Okay, so his book is called What If? Serious Scientific Answers to Absurd Hypothetical Questions. Okay, so one of my favorite excerpts of this book is this question. What would happen to the Earth if the sun suddenly switched off? Okay, just like think of that situation for a moment, right? Well, Munroe basically tells us that, well, first of all, we would have a lower risk of solar flares. We would also have better satellite service. The world would be cheaper to run and safer for everybody, and it seemed like a great world to live in, right? Except one thing, we would all freeze to death, unfortunately. And I guess what I'm trying to use this example for is that my life story and kind of where, how I discovered who I am and why I'm doing what I'm doing now started with one of these absurd questions. And for me, I was 5 years old, not too old, not too young either, 5 years old, sitting straight up in bed. I couldn't sleep. I was having this humongous life crisis, ripe old age of 5, thinking about this absurd question, who am I, right? Who are we? Why are we on this earth? Why are we here? I knew that my name was Valerie Ding. I knew that, my parents were my parents. I knew how old I was. That was about all I really knew, and I just felt very uncomfortable not understanding my purpose and not understanding, what made me, right? So this was like a big started to me. And I guess my first revelation started with 5th grade. Doing this project, starting to think about how the world runs. How do we power the things around us? How do things move? How do things change? How do our appliances work? Why does a coffee grinder work? So I was essentially analyzing like the distribution of power in a home, anyone's home, specifically my home, right? So this is something that a child can do. Start thinking about what makes up the world around him or her, right? And I was prompted by my teachers who probably saw a little bit of obsessive behavior in me, thinking about like, why is she always staring at the math homework? Why is she so obsessed with the problems we're giving her? But for me, it was that understanding at the beginning that math was something fascinating. Math had something more to it. Science was also appealing to me in the sense that it could explain so much about the things around me that I didn't normally see, that I maybe, for example, I might ask questions that people didn't immediately know the answer to, and that in and of itself was fascinating, right? The idea of asking absurd questions and searching for the solution, searching or at least trying to solve some of the problems that we might see once we ask those absurd questions, right? Okay, so a little bit of a backstory. I guess, that was 5th grade, doing that project on power in my home. Immediately after that, thinking about a large variety of different interests. If any of you are in middle school here, you will know that, you have a lot of classes during the day, right? And I was very young, 12 years old, thinking about, on one hand, how do I craft a world that is as chaotic as it could possibly be, right? The dystopian world. I was so fascinated with these worlds that I read about in novels and in books, about places where, people were mind controlled, thinking about, how could something be so chaotic yet have this inherent beauty and inherent complexity, the beauty in the complexity, the beauty of the chaos. That was what really got to me about dystopias. But, I tried to channel all that energy that I had into creative writing, right? Thinking about how to make a world of my own that had those elements, but also had some kind of shimmering light on the horizon that might have some hope for this civilization, and then also thinking about music and the piano and how different instruments in an orchestra might come together and work in beautiful ways that we might not even understand, different people in an orchestra, right, playing different instruments. If any of you are in choir or in band and you're playing your final concert, you kind of feel that energy, right, that resonance, right, that people work together and play instruments even though they're playing entirely different instruments. They're reading different notes on that page. There's some sort of inherent beauty to that complexity. And in some cases, it's chaos, right? But I guess all of that sort of in my mind, fluttering around, led to my ultimate interest in quantum physics. Okay, so you're like 13 years old, and you're like, okay, yeah, she's gonna be a quantum physicist, right? That's a natural thing for me to want to be. So I will describe a little bit more on, what I was thinking at this age and how I got into quantum physics. So for me, as I was saying, I was thinking about power generation. I was doing these science projects, and I continued to do science projects over the next few years, thinking about, like in the 5th grade year, right? I went to a local science fair, and I was like, I have this cool project. I spent a year on it. Like, I feel like I've done a really good job. And I look around, and there's all these amazing projects. You wouldn't believe the range of projects that 12 to 14-year-olds are doing these days. I was 11, so obviously they had an edge, but there was something. Wow, I can say there were middle schoolers working on the ecology around the Willamette River, right? They were working on how our inner brains work, right? They were working on these fascinating things that college students and graduate students work on. And here I was with my refrigerator project, kind of like, oh wow, like there is such a vast world out there that I'm not even aware of, and that took me in, right? I was very attracted to the idea of being in that community, okay? So quantum physics arose in my mind because a science teacher reached out to me very kindly and said, I think you would enjoy talking to a professor that I know at Portland State University. And so she sent me his email, and I was like, can I come to a weekend seminar, please? And he was like, yeah, sure. And I don't think he knew how old I was, because when I showed up for the first class, these were actually night classes that my classmates that I had were, in many cases, my parents' age or even older. And so I was, sitting next to people, like imagine being in class with like your mom or your dad. Like it was definitely intimidating for me. Of course, I didn't understand anything the professor was saying, right? So this was like an electrical engineering seminar, complex circuit diagrams, everything, like logic gates, and here I was, 13 years old, just barely, in control of my own body and my own mind, and just unable to fathom what was happening on the board and unfolding around me in the classroom. So that is what drew me into quantum physics, right? The world of quantum computing as explained by a professor at university to a 13-year-old. So then I tell people I work on solar cells, and they look at my name tag, and they're like, you're from Portland, Oregon, and you work on solar power. That, and many of you, are coming from the Seattle area, you understand the Pacific Northwest is not extremely well known for presence of sun year-round, and same in Portland, right? And so I guess, how did I get into solar power? How did I get into this idea of harnessing light for energy, right? So that's another story. Does anyone? So these are the Swiss Alps. This is a very special place to me because I was visiting CERN in Geneva, Switzerland, my freshman year of high school, as a result of an Intel ISEF sponsored trip to CERN. And so I had been doing these projects, right, already on quantum physics. Yeah, I see a lot of excited faces in the audience. CERN is very dear to my heart. Yeah, so I was working on quantum things, and then we were visiting this local university called EPFL, and it's in Switzerland as well, and they are working on quantum dot solar cells. So I'll let that settle in for a minute, right? Quantum dot solar cells. You can imagine, I was 15 now, and I heard that phrase, I heard that buzzword, quantum dot solar cells, and I immediately, what word do you think I latched on to? Thank you. Yes, quantum. I was just, since I had this many years of an affair with quantum physics, quantum dot solar cells became my lifeblood for the next 3 years. So quantum dot solar cells. What makes them beautiful, what makes them really, really good, right, is the idea that any quantum dot, these are like tiny, tiny particles. They're like a few hairs across. Like you take a single hair, right, and like a quantum dot is like at that level, right? Each of those hairs would contain many, many quantum dots, okay? So a quantum dot is this tiny, tiny material. And in my case, what we like to think about quantum dots, right, is that you can change the size. You can change any material property of these quantum dots. You can change the material, right? It's like a piece of clay that you can just mold into whatever you want it to become. But it has these intrinsic material properties that can absorb different wavelengths of light, right? So I give you a different material, and I give you a different shape and size of a quantum dot, and it can absorb any wavelength of light that you tune it to. Okay, so if any of you play instruments, you can tune the strings of an instrument, right, or of a piano, right, and you can make notes sound different if you want. Probably not advisable, but the idea is that you change material properties to elicit sort of different response to a stimulus, right? So good things, right, because quantum dots, if you're able to change them at will to absorb different parts of that solar spectrum, that means you theoretically can have 100% efficiency of a solar cell, right? But there's a problem with that because these days quantum dot solar cells are incredibly inefficient. And that's what I set out to solve, right? Because I knew there was this theoretical capability for amazing efficiency numbers, unmatched by anything we've seen before. And yet we're not able to achieve that maximum because there was this immature technology. And everyone recognized this. Researchers were publishing papers that were like, we've tested these 3 combinations of material properties, but we can't achieve the efficiency we want to achieve. So that is what brought me into this project of applying quantum physics and cloud computation and these novel algorithms I was developing to quantum dots and to the world of solar technology, right? So science fair circuit, very, very dear to my heart. Met so many good friends through all of these different opportunities, right? The Intel, right? The Siemens, the Google. And specifically at the Google Science Fair, the one big thing that was emphasized to all the participants, I was a finalist in 2013, was to shoot for the moon. Like specifically the phrase, the moonshot, right? Google likes this phrase because it's the idea that you can take something that people never could have thought of before, right? Something that you don't think is actually you don't think is possible. It's impossible, right? And apply that technology and actually see it to realization, right? So we were encouraged to think about the bigger impact of our ideas, right? I had this idea about a solar cell that can absorb greater quantities of light and be more efficient because of its quantum dot properties. Now, what Google challenged me to do was to think about what impact does that have on solar power today, right? Not just quantum dot solar cells, but solar power, right? And I think even bigger, renewable energy today. Like, how are you going to change the world? How are you going to change that field? And then even bigger, right? What is beyond renewable energy, right? What is the world going to look like in 20 years? How are we going to be powering our homes, our schools? Like, how are we going to be powering the world in 20 years? How about 50 years, right? How about 100 years, right? So this is kind of what we were being challenged to think about. And that really changed the way I view research and industry. And that I'm very grateful for that opportunity because not only did I meet these amazing people, right, my community, but I was also drawn into this world of resonance. So I'm returning to that theme of resonance. Right. Resonance, meaning that you're like vibrating, you're like tangibly vibrating, you're very excited about something. The Intel fairs, like the ISEF and the STS, these fairs were opportunities for me to really explore what it means to be a scientist or an engineer in today's society. And as a 17 or 18-year-old now, I know many of us are still thinking about what we want to do with our lives. For those of you who are in middle school or younger, maybe this is kind of a looming sort of decision that you'll eventually make. You don't have to think about it right now. But I know for people in high school, for high schoolers, it can be difficult sometimes to understand what really resonates with you and what really gets you going and what you would want to do for the sake of doing it, not to impress other people, not to be stable in society, not to be accepted by society, but just what makes you happy, right? What really resonates with you, and that's what I found. I found that it was the people. in science. And the people that I surrounded myself with, friends who would message me, when I would happen to be feeling down, they might not even know that I was feeling down or a little bit discouraged, because sometimes when you do research, you look up a term, a very scientific term, right? I don't know if maybe when you're doing homework, you look up a vocab term and you see this massive wall of text, right? Because Google is very smart nowadays, or Bing, or whatever you like to use, and they just they just a huge wall of text with like the term bolded. That's great. It's a great tool, but like sometimes it's intimidating for a young child or a student to go from that first Google search, like I did when I looked up quantum dot solar cells and saw like 10 scientific articles on the first page from Applied Physics Journal, to creating something tangible and something that you really feel proud of, that you can feel like really makes an impact in the world, right? So on that note, I do want to reflect on some things that really changed who I am and how I think of the world. One of these being the Research Science Institute that Anvita did reference prior. And this was very formative for me. The RSI essentially throws you just going into your senior year of high school, it throws you into this graduate school environment where you work alongside graduate students at MIT or Harvard or local Boston universities, and you think about a problem, right? And in my case, I was thinking about how to more efficiently deliver drugs within the body. So this was like I was working with a research mentor at MIT, right? So I was engineering these little nanoparticle walkers, we like to call them, right? They're these two-legged walkers. And the idea is that when you send these little nanoparticle walkers through somebody's bloodstream, they go very efficiently, and they're like running across the bloodstream. And then you might have like a drug or a tracker like piggybacked on that little walker. So these things walk through blood. Okay, that kind of sounds kind of morbid, but they walk through bloodstream, they walk through biological substrates very quickly, and we're able to track them because of those material properties, right? So that was formative. I was like, woo, research, wow, And the application really appealed to me, right? Again, back to that resonance, you're able to go out in the world and really find something that you feel you really can make a dent in and make an impact in, and that was what I fell in love with. A few weeks ago, I was in Italy, and this was another Intel ISEF sponsored trip, and this was a very different experience from RSI. 3 weeks. Whereas at RSI we had 80 kids working on different projects. We're all living together, but every day we head out to our individual work sites and work on our projects, and we feel very accomplished. In Italy, I was working with 19 other 17 to 18-year-olds, and we were working on one app. Okay, so this is one smartphone app, also a medical application. The idea was to track the wrist movements of a small child who might be diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. And we wanted to somehow be able to inform the patient's parents or his or her physician what some immediate action items might be. If we observed certain frequencies of intense movement in those wrists, we would send notifications to the phones of the patient's parents and their physician to do certain things, right? So this was an application of something that had been very dear to my heart for a long time, right? Computer science and computer technology and engineering. So I've yapped at you for a long time about a lot of different competitions and a lot of different events, a lot of different opportunities. I've yapped about quantum physics. I've talked about CERN. I've talked about Italy, right? And you're like, okay, so Valerie talked to us for a long time and got really sentimental and like almost cried and like yelled at us. And so why does this matter to me? Like, what can I take away from this, right? I know you're all thinking this right now. What I'm trying to tell you is that I was a very messy child. I had no idea where I was going for a long part of my life, right? And I was able to pick something, find something that really appealed to me, right? That initial connection to a professor and just kind of like, oh, I'm kind of learning with my parents' friends or whoever these people were, and I knew that like that, but I really knew that quantum physics was a place for me. Thinking about at the time, why does it resonate so much with me? And then basically I was able to think about the bigger picture, right? Overcoming those basic obstacles, like overcoming that wall of text you might see on Google, overcoming the idea that you're learning with people who, again, are your parents' age, overcoming that basic fundamental idea that you can't do it. It's not true. You can do it, right? It was hard for me at times to understand that, you know, I could be capable of these moonshots, right? These world-changing ideas. And now moving forward, you know, with my passions, right? Engineering, you know, applied engineering. How can we make the world a better place? How can we change the things that we're putting into society, right? How can we change the way our society interfaces with technology? I will always be able to have that support structure and that group of incredibly close friends, incredibly close mentors that I've gained and garnered and met through all of these years of following my passion, right? Shooting for the moon even when I really thought I couldn't do it, being supported by my friends in turn, you know, while I was doubting myself, and now being able to have that incredible network. And you know, I'm very excited for what is yet to come. So what I'm trying to say to you, and this is, I guess, what I ask of you now moving forward, is that you join me in this quest to improve the world, right? Or to improve the way that we live, right? How do we introduce nuance into our lives, and how do we make this technology as fascinating and as conducive to further investigation as possible? So, thank you so much.